Hi, AOT team. This is my first lecture on um, the rest of realism in the PowerPoint. You guys have done the quiz up to early realism, which has like Anton Chekhov and Henrik Ibsen, who are over in Europe doing their thing. And so now this lecture's focuses on American realism and what was going on here in the United States in the early 1900s. Um, in the PowerPoint, um, you'll start with the American realism slide, and it has a photo of 6 playwrights that we'll speak to and talk of. The first one is a fellow named Eugene O'Neill. Uh, the cool thing about Eugene O'Neill is he was sort of writing his plays in the 1920s, but he did a mix of both realism and non-realism. There will be clips in the next lecture or next PowerPoint that will contrast the two, so you'll see the difference of Long Day's Journey into Night, which is about a family dynamics, alcoholism, I think mental health, and then his play called The Hairy Ape, which is much more expressionistic, and we'll find out what that means, but it's much more metaphorical. The way it's presented, design-wise, is really symbolic, and whereas Long Day's Journey might have, like, we're in a living room, Hairy Ape, you'll see one clip where it's like neon bars and even the audience bleachers are like bright yellow or bright pink. So even the world that we see visually in the theater is very almost, I guess, dreamlike. Yeah, not what we'd see in someone's house. Yeah. Um, yeah, so that's one of the cool things about Eugene is that he kind of was writing in both styles. Then we have Clifford Odets, who was the resident playwright for the group theater that we talked about, that group of actors in New York who were really inspired by the work of Stanislavski and Chekhov when they came over with one of their plays. I'm pretty sure they brought over The Seagull. I think that was one of the first plays they brought over. Clifford Odets was great. He has a famous play called Waiting for Lefty, which is all about like workers' unions and the taxi cab strike that happened in New York City in, I think, the 20s or 30s. So the 30s, I'm seeing here. So really writing about what was relevant to the time, which playwrights do a lot now, but Clifford Odets was one of the first people to kind of start that trend of like, this social issue is happening, let's write about it and see it on stage, and that might inspire people to act. Arthur Miller is one of the great sort of American realistic playwrights around. Some of his works include Death of a Salesman. I think there's a great movie out there with like Dustin Hoffman in it. He wrote a play called All My Sons, which we might watch at some point in the semester. Another famous play of his is The Crucible, which is pretty awesome. It's a really great play about the Salem witch trials. It's really intense. So what else to know about Arthur Miller? Those are some of his most famous plays. He really liked to write about sort of the father-son dynamic. You see that in Death of a Salesman, just sort of that struggle of maybe these men having businesses for years and their sons kind of rebelling against that or living in a really different way. Arthur Miller, good guy to know. Tennessee Williams, we touched on him, I think, briefly. He writes a lot about the Deep South. So he has Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Streetcar Named Desire. So if you've never seen Streetcar Named Desire, it's a great film with Marlon Brando, who's a method actor. A lot of his shows are kind of about like, are either like a little bit steamy or deal with like the repressed sexuality of the South. So there's kind of those undertones going on. Sort of Deep South in America in sort of the 40s is sort of his vibe. So he's got a lot of kind of famous plays that way. He was also a gay man, closeted, but a lot of those themes come out in his plays. We'll talk about that in our LGBTQ plus module or PowerPoint session. But yeah, there were a few of these early playwrights who identified as as gay men, but weren't open about it because society at the time was pretty rough. Um, yeah, here we go. Yes, another sort of closeted LGBTQ plus figure, William Inge. I actually have never read any of his plays, but he has some great ones. Bus Stop and Picnic are some of his famous pieces. Um, he hung out with Tennessee Williams, which is kind of cool at the time. And I think a lot of his plays deal with themes of love and loneliness. Um, and he had a rough end to his life. He committed suicide in his when he was 60 years old, and so I think a lot of the darkness that a lot of these folks were living, they infused into their work. And that's, again, sort of the big theme of realism in theater, is that it's about the real stuff. It's about sort of like the under the rug, ugly stuff. Whereas in early work, people didn't want to see that. They just wanted to be entertained. And we kind of have both now in our world. But yeah, the realism is about kind of that stuff that folks avoid talking about. A woman, female playwright, Lillian Hellman. She has written a few great plays that have really lived on. Little Foxes is one, and then The Children's Hour is a really great piece that's about these two women who work together, who are best of friends, and one of the little girls at the school accuses them of being lesbians. And chaos ensues. And then it kind of turns out that one actually is, but has doesn't even really identify as, but does have stronger feelings for her friend than she even realized, or her friend realized. Anyway, it's a beautiful piece, and there's a nice clip with Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine that you can check out from The Children's Hour. Yeah. So yeah, good to know that title, The Children's Hour. Written in 1934, I think. And then finally, realistic playwrights. We have August Wilson, so we've got some African-American representation, which is so important. He wrote this really beautiful cycle of plays that were all set in Pittsburgh, but they're set sort of at different decades throughout the 1900s. So there's a play written, from about like 1900 and the 1940s. Each decade kind of gets their own play, and he writes about the African-American experience. There's a great clip in your PowerPoint from Broadway, James Earl Jones in the play Fences. Fences is also made into a film with Denzel Washington, if you want to check that out. But yeah, The Piano Lesson. He has a lot of great kind of classic American plays. Whew. American realism and American playwrights. Hopefully the clips will give you a sense of the world we're living in. Some of it might seem less kind of real from what you watch on TV now, just because the style was evolving. So what you would see in the 1930s on TV that's real, dealing with real stuff, might seem even a little bit over the top from what you might see on like Breaking Bad or something, to a degree. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, early American realism. Enjoy.